IndyCar released their 2024 schedule today, and while I think people are totally watching this video expecting me to crush it, destroy it, say how bad it is, I don't even think it's that bad. I think it's a mixed bag for sure. There's some good, a lot of good actually. There's definitely some bad, and there's definitely one thing that's absolutely ugly. Okay, so real quick, let's take a look at the schedule as it stands. The season will start on March 10th with the Streets of St. Petersburg on NBC, the traditional first race of the season. IndyCar will then take a break and come back with the Thermal Club $1 million Challenge, and I have a lot of thoughts about that event. That is a non-points event. The next points event will take place 42 days after the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg on the streets of Long Beach on USA Network. Then it'll only be a week until Barber Motorsports Park, once again back on NBC. The month of May, you know how this works now, the road course and then the Indy 500, the thing that pays the bills. Streets of Detroit unfortunately moved to USA Network this year, then on to Elkhart Lake in Road America. About a week off to WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, moving up further in the year, obviously losing the season finale date to Nashville. Then it's a big gap, or not quite as big of a gap as maybe we'll see later in the season, but 2 weeks to Mid-Ohio on July 7th, and then the traditional Hy-Vee Iowa doubleheader with the 13th and 14th, and it should be noted that one of those races is a night race. We'll talk about that a little bit later. One of two races on Peacock, the Streets of Toronto on July 21st, and then another long break, just over 20 days, to Worldwide Technologies Raceway in Gateway on August 17th, then on to Portland, again, USA Network. And then the big positive out of this schedule, the return, not only one race on the Milwaukee Mile, two races on the Milwaukee Mile, one in August and one to start off September. And then another great positive for me, the Streets of Nashville to cap off the season on what will hopefully be a high note. So like I said off the top, it's definitely a mixed bag. I'm not prepared to go fully negative on this because I don't think that's fair whatsoever to IndyCar to say that the schedule for 2024 is a negative. I don't feel nearly as bad about this schedule as I did about, say, the 2021 schedule, which I was really down in the dumps about for good reason. I think there are definitely some good things to take away from the 2024 IndyCar calendar, and I actually have them in a list. And number one is there will be more IndyCar race miles in 2024 than there were in 2023. There are 18 race events, not all points events, mind you, but there are 18 versus the 17 of last year. And I think increasing the schedule, although you did add a non-points event at the Thermal Club, is ultimately a good thing. I want to see more racing, not less. I want to see more cars on track, not less. Race car, the sport of auto racing is an in-person, real-life sport. There's only so much theoretical you can talk about, especially in a spec series. So for me, the more races that you can do, the better it is for the sport. And that's something that the box was ticked by Penske Entertainment. They added a race. Now, how they did it has been controversial with the fan base, and I understand some of the reasons why, and we'll talk about that in the Hot Takes video tomorrow, because I think there's one legitimate point about it, but I think a lot of the negativity surrounding my second positive point, which is the Thermal Club $1 million challenge, I think has been completely blown out of proportion in a lot of ways. Yes, I understand that it is a closed-door country club, and IndyCar fans will not be able to, generally speaking, buy a ticket and go to this race. Okay? I understand that point. But if they were going to include the Thermal Club in an IndyCar race weekend, this was the absolute best way to do it. While they're not calling it an all-star race, because technically it's not really an all-star race, I think this is as close to an all-star race as you're going to get with IndyCars. I think that because the Thermal Club wants to be involved, you shouldn't just say no to them. I think you should give them a chance. This is not a Peacock event, which I think a lot of people were worried about. And it's even not only not on Peacock. It's not on USA Network either. So this is something that's on free TV. Everyone and anyone can watch the Thermal Club race. And, let's be honest here. It's tough to find the cubic dollars to go racing these days in IndyCar racing. Now, is that true for all of the teams? Or certainly we're talking about a lot of the top teams. Do they really need the help of folks from the Thermal Club? Probably not. But some of those small teams, maybe this could help them cover some budget gaps if they meet with a Don Cusick type. And frankly, Don Cusick, he has worked tirelessly to promote his IndyCar team. And having covered Don and his team at the Thermal Club, I know how invested he is in making IndyCar's business make sense at the Thermal Club. So, I understand where the fans come from on this, but I think at the end of the day, at least in terms of the, I can't buy a ticket and go to it argument, if you live in the Midwest, where the majority of IndyCar's fans live, right, were you going to buy a ticket, buy a plane ticket, buy a hotel, and fly out to the Thermal Club and go watch that race if you had the option to? I'm sure there's some people who were going to be able to do that, but it was not going to be a huge number. And I get that that's a slippery slope, because then you start talking about closed door races, and that's a discussion we'll get into tomorrow. But just having one of these deals, having it be a gong show sort of deal where it's a fun race, it's not serious, it's not for points, it's okay. And it's on NBC. So for me, it added, it didn't subtract. If it had subtracted, if they had come out and said, yeah, we're going to the Thermal Club instead of Texas, that would have been a problem. But the fact that it was an addition to the schedule, not a problem with me on the Thermal Club. Only one Indy road course race. Hallelujah. We only have one to go to get rid of before the Indy road course. But at the end of the day, the second Indy road course race, I think pretty much across the board, everybody agreed that was way too much Indy road course. And frankly, way too many races at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I still think two's too many. It's overkill at this point. I think that I would prefer to see IndyCar, if they're going to have 17 to 18 events, to spread the love a little bit. But I understand why the road course existed, and I understand why that road course race existed. They wanted to try the IndyCar NASCAR doubleheader. I don't think it quite worked the way a lot of people wanted it to work, and that's why it went away. And I don't know if it'll ever come back, to be quite honest with you. I'd be happy to be surprised, but the fact that they couldn't make it work in Texas suggests to me that both parties, behind closed doors, saw what we saw, which was that the IndyCar fan base would come in and watch a race. They would leave when the NASCAR fan base would come in. And so, I don't know if those fan bases are as compatible as maybe we think. Good news. Night races are back on the schedule. There's two for next year. The first one is the Iowa Race 1, which not only will be a night race, but it will be broadcast on big NBC, primetime Saturday night IndyCar oval racing. Big thumbs up from me. And Gateway at Night, while that is on USA Network, and that's a bit of a disappointment from a TV rating standpoint, I think that's going to help Worldwide Technologies Raceway significantly in terms of ticket sales. The last night race they had was 2019, and the stands were absolutely packed. Again, it's on you guys at home to buy a ticket and go to the freaking race, but at the end of the day, I think that's a total positive for Worldwide Technologies Raceway, and I'm so happy to see them get a night race, and I think it's going to make the show better. Speaking of returns, Milwaukee. I'm so happy about this. I am so freaking happy about Milwaukee coming back. It's a race that never should have left the calendar, but I'm glad that has been corrected. And because of folks like me banging the drum, folks like you banging the drum, it's coming back. And here's the deal. This is some real talk. I am going to call there's probably going to be 10 to 20,000 people that watch this video, and I'm calling every single one of you out. The fans in IndyCar do not have a lot of leverage outside the Indianapolis 500. This is real talk right now, okay? There's a reason why they don't make a lot of decisions that benefit fans. It's because you guys don't generally support the things that you want, okay? They've given you something that you want, Milwaukee. They've not only given it to you once, they're going to give you a doubleheader. Now, I understand that circumstances with making up for the loss of Texas, but there are now 2 Milwaukee races on the schedule. Okay? If you don't buy a ticket to this race, if you don't fill those stands, kiss any opportunity for the fans to have their voices heard in any kind of significant way outside of the Indianapolis 500 in IndyCar goodbye. Okay? If you're mad about the Thermal Club and you think that that's a bad direction for IndyCar to go in, buy a freaking ticket to Milwaukee. Fill the freaking place up. Because if you don't do that, they have every right to say, guess what? The fans don't support what they don't put their money where their mouth is. I know personally on my YouTube channel, we are going to promote the hell out of Milwaukee. We are going to I'm going to try to make that a big event. I know for a fact that I'm going to try to treat that with the reverence and excitement that the Indianapolis 500 gets on my channel, because it means something to me as a fan of the sport, not just as some person who, covers the sport and ties his, wagon to the sport. Milwaukee means something to IndyCar racing, and it's that kind of a track that needs to be on this schedule. So I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I ask that you guys put your money where your mouth is too. Buy a freaking ticket to Milwaukee. We're going to fill that freaking place on 2 days for sure for those 2 races. And finally, Nashville season finale. I think this is a great thing as well. Ending on a street course isn't the greatest thing in the world, for sure. Like, entertainment-wise, you want a super speedway. But I think for the sponsors, I think that's going to be good. I think for the teams, the drivers, championship banquet, all those things are great. The fans, guess what? Your fan base is Midwestern. Nashville's an easy drive from most Midwestern cities. So you can get a good, enthusiastic, knowledgeable crowd there for the season finale. It'll feel like a big deal. That's a positive for me on Nashville. I don't have much more to say about that. If it does come down to an actual championship battle, I'm a bit concerned about silliness kind of taking over. But that seems to be what people want these days. But then again, NASCAR's playoff ratings are dwindling. So maybe they don't want. I don't know. Let's talk about the bad, because there is definitely some bad in the schedule. There's less NBC races than last year. There were 11 big NBC races in 2023. There are 10 in 2024. That's a loss of 1. It's a loss of 2 points races if you don't count the thermal race as a points-paying IndyCar race, or if you don't weigh that the same way. I wouldn't necessarily. So it's not a huge drop in the amount of races on NBC, but it is a drop if you're just counting points races. One of the major big issues that they still have not solved on the schedule, and it only got worse by the fact that Texas has gone off the schedule, is that there is not a points race for 42 days between race number 1 and race number 2. That's St. Petersburg to Long Beach. And of course, as we know, Long Beach is on USA Network, so that's going to be an even tougher sell. Now, that being said, that 42 days isn't as bad as it sounds on paper, because, of course, you do have the Thermal Club $1 million challenge on NBC, and you will also have, presumably, the Indy 500 test will slot in somewhere in between Thermal and Long Beach. That will be broadcast on Peacock, but let's be honest, when Indy cars are going the right direction around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it gets people interested. So, while IndyCar's points racing will take a huge hiatus, it doesn't seem as bad as it looks on paper. But it is bad on paper for sure that there's that big of a gap in the schedule. And I'm a bit disappointed that Laguna Seca didn't move up into that spot. But of course, Laguna Seca also covered off a gap in the summer. So, I mean, Laguna Seca could only plug one hole, and I guess they chose to have it plug a hole in the summer, though I would argue that it would be better served to plug a hole leading up to the Indy 500, but I'm sure there were scheduling concerns with Laguna Seca as well. I mean, you can say things make sense until you're blue in the face, but unless you're in that board meeting, you don't really know. The second huge gap is Toronto to Gateway, which is 27 days, and that's 34 days without actual TV coverage if you don't count Toronto being a Peacock race. That's tough, but again, that's not necessarily IndyCar's fault. That is NBC. with their Olympic coverage, and I kind of roll my eyes at that. But people tell me people watch the Olympics. Who watches the Olympics? I don't know. I haven't met them, but they apparently watch the Olympics. Whatever you say, I believe you. And of course, because I just mentioned Peacock, there are 2 races on the cock for 2024. Toronto, which is just, I don't know what Toronto did. I don't know what they did to deserve it, but they continue to be the Peacock race. And then unfortunately, there's so much positive about Milwaukee, but the one negative is the fact that the first return to Milwaukee, the return of IndyCars to Milwaukee, that is on Peacock. So all the more reason to buy a freaking ticket and go to freaking Milwaukee, okay? Go to the race. You'll have a better time anyway, and you'll actually send the right message for once. So, yeah, that sucks that it's on Peacock, but what can you do? It's a makeup race essentially anyway to do a doubleheader at Milwaukee. And the final thing that I would say is bad is the fact that there was so much talk about a race in Argentina, even if it was non-points, and then just to have absolutely no mention of it whatsoever. Why are we talking about Argentina if we're not going to do it? Like, either, crap or get off the pot on Argentina. And I understand there's a whole bunch of different concerns and whatnot, but why talk about it in the first place if it wasn't going to happen? And maybe they'll announce it later. Maybe. But my suspicion is if it's not on the calendar, it's probably not going to happen because the teams have to make their budgets for the year. And so once again, the whole international race outside of Toronto, it's a lot of talk, unfortunately. And yeah, I wish there wasn't so much talk. I guess I'll just put it that way. And let's get to the ugly. I mean, we know where this is going. We know what we're going to have to talk about. We got to rip the Band-Aid off now. Texas Motor Speedway is gone off the calendar. And here's the deal. We'll start talking some facts first, and then I'm going to defend IndyCar because I think a lot of people are going to misdirect their anger on this one. But at the end of the day, the Indy 500, if you like super speedways, you like super speedway wings, you like seeing the cars with low down, you're going to get to see it once this year, and that's the Indy 500. It's disappointing for sure. Massively disappointing, I would say, that the Indy 500 is the only super speedway race left on the calendar. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that your biggest race is the thing you only do once a year. Now, I understand that you can't do the Indy 500 more than once a year, but to sprinkle super speedways through the rest of the calendar, I think just helps IndyCar have an identity that separates it from Formula One and other racing series. And if it's all road racing and with a couple of short ovals sprinkled in there, you don't quite have the balance. In fact, this is the first time since 1964 that an IndyCar calendar, obviously there was split years where you can point out 2007 Champ Car, 2006 Champ Car, where where this occurred, but the IRL existed and that was all ovals at the time. This is the first time since 1964 that an IndyCar race outside the Indianapolis 500 will not take place on an oval longer than 1.5 miles, which is just insanity. We're talking front engine roadsters the last time that happened. That's crazy to me and unfortunate for sure. I think at the end of the day, a perfect IndyCar schedule is half ovals, half road courses, and then you even split that 25, 25, 25. You go short ovals for 25% of the deal, super speedways for 25, street tracks or temporary tracks 25%, and then road courses the final 25%. Maybe you have a 20 race schedule, 5 each. So that's how I feel about it. I understand that realistically, how would you ever get to that? But a perfect IndyCar schedule to me is that, and right now they don't quite have that. But it is not IndyCar's fault. I think that's the important thing to get out of the way. I think if you're going to blame folks, the number one person you blame is NBC for the Olympic obsession, because they literally could not fit Texas Motor Speedway anywhere else in the year other than April. And, you start looking at the TV partnership deal, and they're starting to talk about, signing the deal, the next TV deal. And something that comes up a lot is the CW. And I know a lot of people are going to have, revulsion to the idea of the CW getting the IndyCar TV contract. But, let's think about this for a second, because I've mentioned a couple of times that IndyCar becomes the redheaded stepchild right after the Indy 500 with NBC because NASCAR comes in. And they're like the redheaded stepchild that the family likes the dog better when the Olympics are on NBC, right? So from my perspective, the next TV deal, while NBC's done some great things for the sport, let's not get this twisted, but I think you want to be on a network if you're IndyCar where you're the top motorsports property. And you also don't have to compete with the Olympics. Because frankly, the fact that the entire motorsport industry has to grind to a halt because of the freaking Olympics, because they all signed a TV deal with NBC, is just silly to me. I'm sorry, it's silly. And that's disappointing. And the second thing is NASCAR Texas Motor Speedway. Once again, NASCAR, they're not IndyCar's friend. Like, I don't know how, that's why doubleheaders don't happen, dude. Like, they could do doubleheaders at Charlotte, even though that probably wouldn't be any good. They could do doubleheaders at Michigan. They could do doubleheaders at Loudon. They could do doubleheaders at Phoenix. They don't want to have Indy cars on ovals. Like, is that obvious enough to you? And with NASCAR moving their date, they were able to strong-arm Texas Motor Speedway to say, no, we don't want an IndyCar event anywhere near that, because people show up to the freaking NASCAR race, And that's what I was bitching about with Milwaukee. If you guys had, and I understand why people didn't show up to Texas, right? Like, it wasn't a good show. And then this year it became a good show. And that was because IndyCar put in the effort to make it a good show. And I think this is where I feel really bad for IndyCar, because they got bit in the ass, because they did the work, they put in the effort, they put on a great freaking show. One of the best IndyCar races I've ever seen. One of the best IndyCar races I've ever seen took place this year at Texas Motor Speedway. One of the best ever. Like, we're talking like top 10 ever. That exciting. And IndyCar did that. IndyCar executed. Jay Fry, the technical committee, everybody involved the drivers made that race what it was. And IndyCar didn't get to sell tickets for the next year's. I mean, that is just, and they didn't do anything wrong. That's just par for the course. That's how it goes in this series. And it's so sad because IndyCar didn't do anything wrong here. And the fans didn't get the opportunity to show their appreciation. IndyCar, I think, earned ticket sales that they won't get to see the result of. And that's just such a freaking shame. But it lies at NBC's feet, it lies at Texas Motor Speedway's feet, and it lies at NASCAR's feet. It's unfortunately not IndyCar's fault. Now, it could have IndyCar fixed the Texas Motor Speedway product 2 years earlier, and maybe the stands were full, last year, and then it makes a difference. I'm sure you could make that argument. But at the end of the day, IndyCar did what it needed to do. It met its obligations, and its partners are the ones who let it down in this case. But it's just such a freaking shame, because to me, super speedway racing, and I had this discussion with Kyle a while back, because he was like, David, I don't think you like road courses. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. I do like road courses, but I think the big thing for me is that it's all about the balance. And when the scales are tipped in the wrong direction, I felt this way when the IRL was too oval heavy. I wanted more road courses. And I would have, if I'd had this channel in 2009, you'd hear me banging on about road courses, how they need Road America, and they need to have Cleveland, and they need to have... But, now that we have all the road courses, we've lost all the ovals, and especially the super speedways. And if you put a lie detector on me right now, I'd probably tell you that super speedways are the races that I get the most excited about, that I'm the most emotionally invested in. And I think a lot of fans are that way. And it's really disappointing to see the super speedways go away. I mean, my God, what do we have to... I mean, so here's the deal. Here's my final thoughts. If you're mad about Texas leaving, if you're happy about Milwaukee, and you want more super speedways, I'm going to say it again. Buy a ticket to Milwaukee, fill that freaking place up, and then ask for Michigan. Simple as. Because if you fill that place up, Milwaukee, and you prove to them that you want to buy a ticket, you want to support races, I bet they could make Michigan happen. Because Michigan has one major race a year. There is time in that schedule at Michigan. The only thing that would stop them would be NASCAR and possibly NBC, which is the thing that happened at Texas. But the only difference between Michigan and Texas is no one's talking about reconfiguring Michigan. So, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a mixed bag, right? It's not all positive. It's not all negative. but I hope this has been a nuanced take on the IndyCar schedule for 2024. If you can't tell already, I'm really excited for Milwaukee. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Hot Takes tomorrow. I'll see you in the next video.